The air in Corvana Station's lower bazaar tasted like desperation and recycled oxygen. Dex Rivera pulled his worn leather jacket tighter as he navigated through the maze of illegal vendors, black market dealers, and beings from a dozen different worlds, all trying to survive in the lawless underbelly of the galaxy's most notorious trading hub. The flickering neon signs cast eerie shadows across scarred metal walls, advertising everything from stolen starship parts to synthetic narcotics. Dex wasn't here for the usual contraband. His ship, the Wandering Star, needed a new quantum drive regulator, and Corvana was one of the few places in this sector where you could get one without asking too many questions about serial numbers or previous owners. He'd been running cargo for nearly 15 years now, staying off the grid, keeping his head down, and trying to forget the life he'd left behind. The crowd ahead seemed unusually thick, voices rising in excitement over the general din of the marketplace. Dex cursed under his breath. He hated crowds, hated the attention they drew. But as he tried to find an alternate route, a particular sound made him pause, the distinctive clicking language of the Nexary, spoken in what sounded like a plea. Despite his better judgment, curiosity drew him forward. He pushed through the gathering crowd until he could see what had captured everyone's attention, and the sight made his stomach clench with a familiar rage he thought he'd buried years ago. In the center of the circle, kneeling on the filthy deck plating, was a Nexary woman. Her skin held the deep azure hue typical of her species, marked with the intricate silver patterns that told the story of her lineage. Her long, dark hair had been roughly cropped short, a sign of shame in Nexary culture. Around her neck hung a crude metal collar, and clutched against her chest was a small bundle that Dex realized with growing horror was a child. The child couldn't have been older than 6 or 7, her skin pale and sickly compared to her mother's vibrant blue. Even from his position in the crowd, Dex could see the labored rise and fall of the little girl's chest. "What's the opening bid?" shouted a Vacaran trader, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly. "She's strong, good for heavy labor, and if the kid dies, well, that's one less mouth to feed." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Dex felt his hands clench into fists. The Nexary woman, Zara, he heard someone call her, raised her head slightly. Her eyes, a striking golden amber, swept across the crowd with a mixture of defiance and desperate hope. When her gaze briefly met Dex's, he saw something there that reminded him painfully of his own reflection in darker times, the look of someone who had lost everything but refused to surrender. 50 credits, called out a gruff voice. 75, countered another. 100. With each bid, Zara's grip tightened on her daughter. The child stirred weakly, and Zara whispered something in her ear, words too soft to hear but clearly meant to comfort. "What's wrong with the kid?" Dex found himself asking the Rodian standing next to him. The alien's bulbous eyes swiveled toward him. "Some kind of genetic thing. Nexary blood disease. Kid won't last another month without proper treatment, and you know how expensive that is. Mother's been trying to sell herself for days now, trying to raise enough to get the girl to a proper medical facility." The bidding had reached 200 credits. Dex knew it wasn't nearly enough for the kind of treatment the child would need. Hell, it probably wasn't enough to book passage off station, let alone pay for medical care. 250. The bid came from a particularly unsavory-looking human in a stained jumpsuit, his leering grin revealing several missing teeth. Zara closed her eyes briefly, and Dex saw her shoulders slump almost imperceptibly. She knew, just as he did, that whoever bought her wouldn't give a damn about her daughter's medical needs. The child would die, and Zara would spend whatever remained of her life in servitude to someone who saw her as nothing more than property. The words left his mouth before his brain could stop them. 500. The crowd fell silent. All eyes turned toward him, including Zara's. Up close, even kneeling and in chains, she was beautiful, but it was her fierce determination that struck him most. This was a woman who would literally sell herself into slavery to save her child. The thought made something twist painfully in his chest. 500 going once, the auctioneer called, clearly eager to close the deal. 600, the gap-toothed human countered, glaring at Dex. Without hesitation, Dex stepped forward. 1,000 credits. A murmur ran through the crowd. That was serious money, more than most of these people saw in a month. The auctioneer's eyes lit up with greed. Sold, he declared, before anyone could counterbid. Dex moved through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares and whispered conversations. He knelt down in front of Zara, meeting her suspicious gaze directly. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked quietly. "Nina," Zara replied, her voice hoarse but steady. "Why does it matter to you?" Instead of answering, Dex turned to the auctioneer, a slimy hut named Gorga who ran most of the illegal trade on this level of the station. "I want the collar removed. Now." Of course, Gorga wheezed, motioning to one of his thugs. "Soon as you transfer the credits." Dex activated his wrist comm and authorized the payment. The electronic collar around Zara's neck deactivated with a soft beep, and she rubbed the raw skin beneath it with her free hand, never letting go of Nina with the other. "Can you walk?" Dex asked. Zara nodded, struggling to her feet. She was taller than he'd expected, nearly matching his own height. Despite days of kneeling in the marketplace, despite the desperation of her situation, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Follow me," Dex said, then paused. "And stay close. This place isn't safe for anyone, especially not for you and your daughter." As they moved through the thinning crowd, Zara spoke quietly beside him. "You paid too much. A Nexari female, especially one with a sick child, isn't worth 1,000 credits on the slave market." "You're not a slave," Dex replied without looking at her. "That money wasn't payment for you. Consider it a loan for your daughter's medical treatment." Zara stopped walking. When Dex turned back, he saw confusion and suspicion warring in her expression. "Nobody does something like that without expecting something in return," she said. "What do you want from me?" Dex studied her face, the proud set of her jaw, the protective way she held her daughter, the wariness in her eyes that spoke of betrayals and broken promises. He recognized all of it because he'd worn the same expression himself, years ago, when the galaxy had taught him that kindness was usually a mask for cruelty. "I want you and Nina to be safe," he said simply. "That's all." Before Zara could respond, a commotion erupted behind them. Shouts and the sound of running feet echoed through the marketplace. Dex spun around to see several armed figures pushing through the crowd, their movements purposeful and coordinated. "Bounty hunters," he muttered, recognizing the tactical formation. His hand moved instinctively to the blaster at his hip. "They're after me," Zara said, her voice tight with fear. Gorga must have signaled them as soon as the sale was complete. "They'll want to reclaim stolen property." Dex grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "This way. My ship's docked on level 7. They moved quickly through the maze of corridors that honeycombed the station's lower levels. Nina whimpered weakly in her mother's arms, and Zara whispered soothing words in Nexari. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. "There," one of the hunters shouted. "Blueskin and the human." Blaster fire scorched the air where they'd been standing moments before. Dex pulled Zara into a side corridor, his mind racing. The main lifts to the docking levels would be watched now. They needed another way up. "Can you climb?" he asked Zara. She looked at him with fierce determination. "With Nina?" "Yes." Dex led them to a maintenance shaft that connected to the station's primary power conduits. It was cramped, poorly lit, and definitely not designed for quick travel with a sick child, but it would get them to the upper levels without being seen. As they climbed through the narrow passages, Zara spoke quietly behind him. "Why are you helping us? You don't even know us." Dex paused at a junction, listening for sounds of pursuit before continuing upward. The question deserved an honest answer, but the truth was complicated. How could he explain that watching her kneel in that marketplace, seeing her willing to sacrifice everything for her child, had awakened something in him he'd thought was dead? How could he tell her that for the first time in years, He felt like he was doing something that mattered. "Maybe I'm tired of walking past people who need help," he said finally. They emerged from the maintenance shaft onto level 7, not far from where the Wandering Star was docked. The ship wasn't much to look at, a modified cargo hauler with mismatched hull patches and engine upgrades that had been jury-rigged over the years, but she was fast, reliable, and most importantly, anonymous. As they approached the docking bay, Zara suddenly stumbled. Dex caught her arm, steadying her, and realized she was exhausted. She'd probably been kneeling in that marketplace for days with little food or rest, and carrying Nina wasn't helping. "Almost there," he assured her. The Wandering Star's airlock hissed open at Dex's approach. He ushered Zara and Nina inside, then quickly began the pre-flight sequence. Behind them, he could hear the sound of security forces cordoning off the area, but it was too late. Within minutes, they were clear of the station and jumping to hyperspace. In the sudden quiet of hyperspace travel, Zara finally allowed herself to sit down in the cargo hold, still cradling Nina protectively. The little girl's breathing seemed even more labored than before. "She needs a medical facility," Zara said, her voice tight with worry. "Soon." Dex knelt down beside them, studying Nina's pale features. The child's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing the same golden amber as her mother's, before closing again. "I know a place," he said. "A ship called Haven's Rest. They have a full medical bay and they help people like you, people running from situations they didn't choose." Zara looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd seen her in the marketplace, her expression held something other than suspicion or desperation. It was hope, fragile and tentative, but real. "Thank you," she whispered. Dex stood up, uncomfortable with gratitude he wasn't sure he deserved. "Get some rest. We've got a long journey ahead of us." As he returned to the cockpit, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken a turn he hadn't expected. For 15 years, he'd been running from his past, keeping everyone at arm's length, telling himself that he was better off alone. Now, with a Nexari woman and her dying daughter aboard his ship, he was beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, some things were worth the risk of caring about. Outside the viewport, the stars streaked past in the endless dance of hyperspace, carrying them toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, Dex Rivera wasn't running away from something. He was running toward hope. The Haven's Rest didn't look like much from the outside, just another aging cargo hauler drifting in the shadow of an asteroid field, its hull scarred by years of hard use and deliberate modifications designed to make it appear unremarkable. But as the Wandering Star approached the larger vessel, Dex felt the familiar mixture of relief and apprehension that always came with returning to this place. "It's bigger than I expected," Zara said quietly from the co-pilot's seat. She'd insisted on staying in the cockpit during their approach, unwilling to leave Nina alone in the cargo hold even though the child was sleeping peacefully for the first time in days. "Tessa doesn't believe in doing things halfway," Dex replied, guiding his ship toward the Haven's Rest's docking bay. When she decided to help refugees, she converted an entire heavy freighter into a mobile medical facility and safe house. The docking procedure was smooth and familiar. As soon as the Wandering Star was secured, Dex could hear the hiss of the external airlock cycling. He turned to Zara, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand instinctively moved to check on Nina. "These people are good," he assured her. "They've helped hundreds of beings escape situations like yours. You can trust them." Zara's golden eyes met his. "The way I can trust you?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither of them was quite ready to explore. Over the past 3 days of hyperspace travel, they'd talked, carefully, cautiously, sharing stories of their lives while dancing around the deeper currents that seemed to flow whenever they looked at each other. Dex had told her about his years as a smuggler, though he'd kept the details of his past deliberately vague. Zara had spoken of her homeworld, destroyed in the corporate wars that had scattered her people across the galaxy, and of her husband Tobias, killed defending their settlement from raiders. "Yeah," Dex said finally. "The way you can trust me." The airlock opened with a soft chime, and a figure stepped through that made Dex smile despite his usual reserve. Marcus Chen hadn't changed much in the 2 years since Dex had last seen him, still tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and the kind of gentle eyes that put patients at ease. He wore the practical blue jumpsuit of a ship's medic, but Dex knew Marcus had trained at some of the best medical facilities in the core worlds before giving up a lucrative practice to work with refugees. "Dex," Marcus said, his face lighting up with genuine warmth. "It's good to see you again. Though I have to admit, when you sent that encrypted message about a medical emergency, I was hoping you weren't the patient." "Not this time," Dex replied, stepping aside so Marcus could see Zara and Nina. "Marcus Chen, meet Zara Vex and her daughter Nina. Nina's got some kind of genetic blood disorder. Nexury specific, from what I understand." Marcus's expression immediately shifted to professional concern as he approached them. Zara tensed, her arms tightening protectively around Nina, but something in the medic's manner seemed to reassure her. "May I?" Marcus asked, holding out his hands. Zara hesitated for only a moment before carefully transferring Nina to Marcus's arms. The little girl stirred slightly but didn't wake, her pale blue skin almost translucent in the ship's lighting. Marcus's examination was quick but thorough, his scanner passing over Nina's small form while he murmured observations to himself. When he looked up, his expression was grave but not hopeless. "Zirian syndrome," he said. "It's rare, but treatable if we catch it in time. She'll need immediate transfusion therapy and genetic stabilization. It's going to take several weeks, maybe longer. Can you save her?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Marcus said firmly. "But we need to get her to the medical bay immediately." As they moved through the Haven's Rest's corridors, Dex was struck by how much the ship had grown since his last visit. What had once been cargo holds had been converted into living quarters, workshops, and common areas. The walls were painted in warm, welcoming colors, and everywhere he looked, he saw signs of life: children's drawings, small gardens growing under full-spectrum lights, the sound of laughter from somewhere deeper in the ship. "How many people are you sheltering now?" he asked Marcus as they walked. "About 200 at the moment," Marcus replied. "We're at capacity, but Tessa can never bring herself to turn anyone away." They reached the medical bay, a state-of-the-art facility that would have been impressive even on a dedicated hospital ship. Several other medical staff were already preparing equipment based on Marcus's advance instructions. Zara watched with wide eyes as they gently took Nina from her arms and placed her on a biobed. "She'll be unconscious for the initial procedures," Marcus explained. "It's safer that way, and she won't feel any discomfort. But I need to ask, how long has she been without proper treatment?" 3 months, Zara replied, her voice tight. "Ever since we fled our settlement. I've been trying to get her to a medical facility, but..." She trailed off, the weight of everything she'd endured clear in her expression. "You did everything you could," Marcus said gently. "And you got her here in time. That's what matters." As the medical team began their work, Dex found himself watching Zara more than the procedures. She stood perfectly still, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, but he could see the tremor in her shoulders, the way she held herself as if one wrong move might shatter her completely. Without thinking, he moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his presence without crowding her. When she glanced at him, he saw tears she was fighting not to shed. "She's going to be okay," he said quietly. "You don't know that," Zara whispered. "You can't promise that." "No," Dex admitted. "But Marcus is the best medic I've ever known, and this ship has saved more lives than I can count. If anyone can help Nina, it's them." A new voice interrupted them from the medical bay's entrance. Well. Dex Rivera gracing us with his presence again. And here I thought you'd finally learn to stay out of trouble." Dex turned to see Tessa Blackwood striding into the room, her presence immediately commanding attention. She was a woman in her early 40s, with short-cropped auburn hair and the kind of bearing that spoke of military training. Her left arm was cybernetic, a high-quality replacement that moved with perfect precision, and her green eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who'd seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners. "Captain Blackwood," Dex said, offering a slight nod. "Thanks for taking us in." "Always room for strays," Tessa replied, but her tone was warm despite the casual words. Her gaze shifted to Zara, and Dex saw immediate recognition and understanding pass between the two women. "Ms. Vex, I presume. Don't worry about your daughter. Marcus has pulled off bigger miracles than this." "Thank you," Zara said simply. "The real question," Tessa continued, turning back to Dex, "is what you're planning to do now. That 1,000 credits you paid for Zara's freedom has probably put a pretty significant bounty on both your heads. The slavers don't like it when someone interferes with their business." Dex felt Zara stiffen beside him. He hadn't told her about the likely consequences of his actions, hadn't wanted to add to her worries while Nina was so sick. "I can handle myself," he said. "I'm sure you can," Tessa replied dryly. "But what about her? And what about Nina, once she's recovered? They can't stay on the Haven's Rest forever." It was a fair question, and one Dex had been avoiding thinking about too deeply. The truth was, he hadn't planned beyond getting Nina medical treatment. He'd acted on instinct in that marketplace, driven by something he couldn't quite name, and now he was faced with the complicated reality of what came next. "I'll figure something out," he said. Tessa studied him for a long moment, then smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both knowing and slightly predatory. "I'm sure you will. In the meantime, why don't you show Zara around the ship? She might find it interesting to see what we do here." As they left the medical bay, Zara walking close beside him through the ship's corridors, Dex found himself seeing the Haven's Rest through her eyes. In one of the converted cargo holds, they found a classroom where a mixed group of children from a dozen different species were learning basic mathematics from a patient Andorian teacher. In another area, adults worked at various crafts and trades, learning skills that would help them build new lives wherever they ended up. "It's remarkable," Zara said as they paused to watch a group of Nexari refugees working on traditional textiles. "How does Captain Blackwood keep all this running?" Very carefully, came a new voice behind them. They turned to see a young Nexari male approaching, his skin bearing the deep purple hue of the mountain clans. He was perhaps 25, with the lean build of an engineer and intelligent dark eyes. "I'm Cale Thorin. I help maintain the ship's systems." Zara's eyes widened slightly. "Thorin clan? From the Azurite Mountains?" "What's left of us," Cale replied with a sad smile. "I heard about Nina. Marcus asked me to help with her care. I have some experience with Xerian syndrome. My younger sister had it." "Had?" Zara asked, hope and fear warring in her voice. "She's 17 now and studying xenobiology on New Geneva," Cale said gently. "Completely healthy. The treatments have come a long way in the past few years." Dex watched the exchange with interest, noting how Zara's posture relaxed slightly at hearing from someone who truly understood her situation. There was something else there too, a flash of recognition, maybe even attraction, as Cale smiled at her. The observation stirred an unexpected feeling in Dex's chest that he didn't care to examine too closely. Over the following days, as Nina began her treatment and slowly started to improve, Dex found himself in an odd position. He was welcome on the Haven's Rest, Tessa had made that clear, but he was also restless in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He'd grown accustomed to the freedom of space travel, to having only himself to worry about. Now, watching Zara hover anxiously over her daughter's bedside, seeing her gradually begin to smile as Nina grew stronger, he felt tethered in a way that was both comforting and terrifying. "You're brooding," Tessa observed one evening as they stood together in the ship's observation lounge, watching the stars whirl slowly past. "I don't brood," Dex replied. "Please. You've been stalking around my ship like a caged Voronskr for 3 days. What's eating at you?" Dex was quiet for a long moment, considering how to put his confusion into words. "I keep thinking about that marketplace on Corvana. About Zara kneeling there, willing to sell herself to save her daughter. I've seen a lot of desperate people over the years, Tessa. Why did she get to me like that? Tessa turned to study his profile, her expression thoughtful. Maybe because she reminded you of someone. Who? You, she said simply. Think about it, Dex. When we first met, you were willing to sacrifice everything, your career, your reputation, your freedom, to do what you thought was right. Maybe you recognized a kindred spirit. The observation hit closer to home than Dex was comfortable with. He'd spent years trying not to think about the events that had led to his exile from civilized space, about the choices that had cost him everything he'd once held dear. That was different, he said. Was it? Tessa challenged. Or are you just afraid to admit that maybe, after all these years of running, you found something worth staying for? Before Dex could respond, they were interrupted by rapid footsteps. Zara appeared in the lounge doorway, her face bright with the first genuine joy Dex had seen from her. She's awake, Zara said, her voice thick with emotion. Nina's awake and asking for food. Marcus says the initial treatment is working better than expected. The relief in her voice was so profound that Dex felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. Without thinking, he stepped forward and pulled Zara into a hug. For a moment, she tensed with surprise, then melted against him, her arms coming up to wrap around his waist. Thank you, she whispered against his shoulder. For everything. When they broke apart, Dex saw tears streaming down her face, but for the first time since he'd known her, they were tears of joy rather than desperation. The sight made something shift inside him, a recognition of just how deeply she'd worked her way into his heart without him realizing it. Can I see her? He asked. Zara nodded, taking his hand with natural ease that surprised them both. As they walked back toward the medical bay together, Dex caught Tessa's knowing smile in his peripheral vision. Maybe she was right. Maybe, after years of running from everything that mattered, he'd finally found something worth staying for. Nina was sitting up in her bio bed when they arrived, her color already noticeably better than it had been days earlier. When she saw Dex, she smiled shyly. Mama says you're the one who helped us, she said in accented standard, her voice still weak but clear. Your mama did all the hard work, Dex replied, kneeling beside her bed. I just gave her a ride. Nina giggled, the sound like music after days of worried silence. Will you tell me about your ship? Mama says it's called the Wandering Star. As Dex began to describe his vessel to the fascinated little girl, Zara stood watching them both, her heart full of emotions she wasn't quite ready to name. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she allowed herself to think about the future, not just survival, but actual happiness. And increasingly, those thoughts included the gruff, kind-hearted smuggler who had appeared in her life like an answer to prayers she'd been afraid to voice. Outside the medical bay, the Haven's Rest continued its quiet work of healing and hope, carrying its precious cargo of refugees toward better tomorrows. And in that moment, surrounded by the gentle hum of life support systems and the soft murmur of Nina's questions, both Dex and Zara began to understand that sometimes salvation came not from escaping the past, but from finding someone worth building a future with. The alert klaxon that woke Dex from his restless sleep aboard the Haven's Rest was one he'd hoped never to hear again. 3 sharp blasts, a pause, then 2 more, the signal for incoming hostiles. He was out of his bunk and reaching for his blaster before his mind fully processed what was happening. The ship's corridors were already alive with controlled urgency as crew members moved to emergency stations. Dex found Captain Tessa Blackwood in the command center, her cybernetic fingers dancing across multiple control surfaces while she coordinated the ship's defensive measures. What's the situation? He asked, moving to stand beside her command chair. Long-range sensors picked up a military patrol moving in our direction, Tessa replied without looking up from her displays. Configuration matches Alliance Navy vessels, but they're running without proper identification transponders. Dex felt his blood turn to ice. Alliance Navy? Are you sure? The ship profiles are unmistakable. 3 heavy cruisers and a command vessel. Tessa's green eyes flicked to his face, noting his sudden pallor. Dex, what aren't you telling me? Before he could answer, another voice cut through the command center's controlled chaos, a voice that made every muscle in Dex's body tense with recognition and old anger. Haven's Rest, this is Admiral Helena Cross of the Alliance vessel Retribution. You are harboring a known fugitive and enemy of the state. Prepare to be boarded for inspection. The communication channel crackled with static, but the voice was unmistakably that of the woman who had destroyed Dex's life 15 years ago. Tessa's eyes narrowed as she saw the expression on his face. Friend of yours? She asked dryly. Something like that, Dex muttered, his hand instinctively moving to the scar that ran along his left temple, a permanent reminder of his last encounter with Helena Cross. Dex. Zara's voice from the command center's entrance made him turn. She stood there holding Nina's hand, both of them looking worried but determined. Nina's color was much better after a week of treatment, though she was still weak. Marcus said there might be trouble. Are we safe? The question hit him like a physical blow. Are we safe? When had her safety become so important to him that the mere thought of her in danger made his chest tighten with panic? I need to talk to Cross, he said to Tessa. Alone. Tessa studied his face for a moment, then nodded curtly. Clear the command center, she ordered her crew. Maintain stations but give us some privacy. As the crew filed out, Zara approached him, her golden eyes searching his face. Dex, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have, he replied, then caught her hand gently. I need you to take Nina and get ready to leave. Pack light, just essentials. Leave. Zara's grip on his hand tightened. Dex, what's happening? Before he could answer, Tessa had opened a secure communication channel. The main display flickered to life, revealing a woman in an Alliance admiral's uniform. Helena Cross had aged well, her dark hair was now streaked with silver, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 15 years ago, but she still carried herself with the same cold authority that had once commanded Dex's respect. Hello, Dex, Helena said, her voice carrying across the years like a blade. It's been a long time. Not long enough, Dex replied, stepping into view of the pickup. He heard Zara's sharp intake of breath behind him, but his focus was entirely on the woman who had branded him a traitor. Helena's smile was thin and humorless. Still carrying a grudge, I see. Though I have to admit, I'm impressed you've managed to stay hidden this long. The Dex Rivera I knew was never that good at keeping his head down. What do you want, Helena? What I've always wanted, justice. You were convicted in absentia of treason, conspiracy, and the murder of innocent civilians. The Alliance has a long memory, Dex, and an even longer reach. Behind him, Dex heard Zara's whispered murder, and felt his heart sink. He'd known this moment would come eventually, when he'd have to explain the ghosts that followed him. He'd just hoped it wouldn't be like this. Those charges were fabricated and you know it, he said to Helena. Do I? You disobeyed direct orders, interfered with a sanctioned military operation, and caused the deaths of 3 Alliance soldiers. The tribunal was very clear about your guilt. I saved 300 civilian refugees from being massacred. Dex's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. Your sanctioned operation was genocide, Helena. I did what was right. You did what was sentimental, Helena corrected coldly. And it cost good soldiers their lives. The old argument, the same circular logic that had destroyed his military career and sent him into exile. Dex felt 15 years of suppressed anger and guilt rising in his throat like bile. What do you want? He repeated. Your surrender. Come aboard the Retribution voluntarily, and I'll allow the Haven's Rest to continue its humanitarian mission unmolested. Refuse, and I'll be forced to board and search every inch of this vessel. I'm sure Captain Blackwood has many interesting things aboard that the Alliance would find questionable. It was a trap, and they all knew it. If Dex surrendered, he'd disappear into the Alliance's prison system and never be seen again. But if he refused, Helena would tear the Haven's rest apart, and all the refugees aboard, including Zara and Nina, would suffer for his past. I need time to consider, Dex said. You have 1 hour, Helena replied. Don't try to run, Dex. My ships are faster than yours, and I have no intention of letting you slip away again. The communication channel closed, leaving the command center in tense silence. When Dex finally turned around, he found Zara staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part shock, part hurt, part something else that might have been disappointment. Murder, she said quietly. Treason. It's not what you think, Dex began, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. Then tell me what it is. Tell me who you really are, because the man I thought I knew wouldn't have those kinds of charges hanging over him. The pain in her voice was worse than Helena's accusations. Dex looked down at Nina, who was watching the adults with wide, frightened eyes, and felt the weight of his past crushing down on him. 15 years ago, I was a major in the Alliance Special Forces, he said quietly. Helena Cross was my commanding officer, and I thought she was the finest soldier I'd ever served under. Right up until she ordered me to help cover up the slaughter of a refugee camp. Zara's expression shifted slightly, some of the hardness leaving her eyes. There was a corporate war on Kepler Prime, Dex continued. Nasty business, with atrocities on both sides. The Alliance was supposed to be keeping the peace, but Helena had made a deal with one of the corporations. In exchange for mining rights, we were to eliminate a refugee camp that was harboring insurgents. Were they? Tessa asked quietly. Harboring insurgents? 300 people, mostly women and children, Dex said. If there were insurgents among them, they were hiding damn well. Helena didn't care. She wanted them gone, and she ordered me to coordinate the strike. But you didn't, Zara said, understanding beginning to dawn in her voice. I warned them instead. Helped them evacuate. But Helena's forces were already in position, and when they found the camp empty, they came after my team. 3 good soldiers died because I chose to save strangers instead of following orders. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of old choices and their consequences. Finally, Nina's small voice broke through the tension. You saved people like us. Dex knelt down to her level, meeting her innocent gaze. I tried to, sweetheart. Just like your mama would have done. Then you're not a bad man, Nina said with the simple certainty of childhood. Bad men don't save people. The trust in her voice nearly broke something inside Dex's chest. He looked up at Zara, seeing his own emotions reflected in her golden eyes, fear, yes, but also understanding in something that looked dangerously like love. I won't let her take you, Zara said fiercely. We'll fight. With what? Dex asked gently. The Haven's rest isn't a warship, Zara. Helena has enough firepower to reduce us to scrap metal. Then we run. She was right about her ships being faster. We wouldn't make it to the next jump point. Tessa, who had been listening silently, suddenly straightened in her command chair. Maybe we don't have to run or fight, she said thoughtfully. Dex, you said Helena made a deal with a corporation 15 years ago. Do you have any proof of that? I kept copies of everything, Dex replied. Communication logs, financial transfers, operational orders. I figured someday I might need them. Where are they? Encrypted data core in my ship's computer. Why? Tessa's smile was sharp and predatory. Because Admiral Helena Cross has been under investigation by Alliance Internal Affairs for the past 6 months. Allegations of corruption, unauthorized military operations, profiteering. The kind of charges that could see her stripped of rank and imprisoned. How do you know that? Dex asked. Because one of my regular contacts is an IA investigator who's been building a case against her. He'd be very interested in seeing your evidence. Hope flickered in Dex's chest, but he forced himself to be cautious. Even if we could get the evidence to Internal Affairs, Helena's here now. She's not going to wait for a corruption trial. No, Tessa agreed. But she might be willing to make a deal if she knows her own career is on the line. As they began to formulate a plan, Zara moved closer to Dex, her hand finding his arm. "Why didn't you tell me about this before?" she asked quietly. "Because I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that once you knew what I really was, a fugitive, a man with a past that follows him everywhere, you'd realize you and Nina deserved better." Zara's eyes softened. "Dex, do you know what I see when I look at you? I see a man who gave up everything to save innocent people. I see someone who risked his life to help a desperate woman and her dying child. I see a person who's spent 15 years running from the consequences of doing the right thing." She reached up to touch the scar on his temple, her fingers gentle against the old wound. "I don't care about your past. I care about who you are now, and who you choose to be." The simple acceptance in her voice, the unconditional trust, made Dex feel something he hadn't experienced in years, the possibility of redemption, of a future worth fighting for. "I love you," he said, the words coming out before he could stop them. Zara's smile was radiant. "I love you too. Now let's figure out how to get out of this mess so we can have a proper conversation about it." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation and tense anticipation. Tessa contacted her internal affairs source, sending him copies of Dex's evidence files. Meanwhile, Dex and Zara worked together to prepare contingency plans, escape routes, emergency protocols, ways to keep Nina safe if everything went wrong. When Helena's voice crackled over the comm system again, demanding Dex's answer, they were as ready as they could be. "Admiral Cross," Dex said formally, "I have a counter-proposal for you." Helena's image appeared on the screen, her expression coldly amused. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate, Dex." "Actually, I think I am. Tell me, how's the internal affairs investigation going? The one into your activities on Kepler Prime and a dozen other worlds where you've been profiteering off military operations?" For the first time since the conversation began, Helena's composure cracked slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Financial records, communication logs, operational reports, Dex continued relentlessly. 15 years worth of evidence showing how Admiral Helena Cross has been using her position to enrich herself and her corporate allies. Evidence that's already in the hands of Alliance Internal Affairs. Helena's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Check your secure communications, Helena. I think you'll find some very interesting messages waiting for you." The silence stretched for long seconds as Helena presumably checked her messages. When she looked back at the screen, her expression was murderous. "What do you want?" she asked through gritted teeth. "Safe passage for everyone aboard this ship. No pursuit, no retaliation, no further attempts to arrest me or interfere with the Haven's Rest's mission. In exchange, I'll turn myself into proper Alliance authorities, not your personal hit squad, for a fair trial based on actual evidence. And if I refuse? Then Internal Affairs gets a full briefing on every illegal operation you've run, every payoff you've taken, every innocent person who's died because of your greed. Your choice, Helena. Walk away now with your freedom, or try to take me down and lose everything." Helena stared at him for a long moment, and Dex could practically see her calculating the odds. Finally, she spoke, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You have 24 hours to clear this sector. If I see you again, evidence or no evidence, I'll blow you out of space and worry about the consequences later." The communication channel went dead. On the tactical display, they watched as Helena's ships began to move away from their position, heading back toward Alliance space. "Is it over?" Zara asked quietly. "For now," Dex replied, pulling her close. "But Helena won't give up. She'll find another way to come after me. Then we'll face it together," Zara said firmly. "All of us. Nina, me, you, we're a family now, and families protect each other." As if summoned by her words, Nina appeared at their side, looking up at them with bright, curious eyes. "Are we safe now?" she asked. Dex knelt down and gathered both of them into his arms, feeling something settle in his chest that he'd never experienced before, the deep, abiding peace of belonging somewhere, to someone. "We're safe, sweetheart," he said, meaning it more than he'd ever meant anything in his life. "We're going to be just fine." Outside the Haven's Rest's viewports, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, carrying them all toward an uncertain but hopeful future. For Dex Rivera, the long years of running were finally over. He'd found his home in the arms of a woman who saw past his scars to the man beneath, and in the trust of a child who believed in his essential goodness. The past would always be with him, but for the first time in 15 years, it no longer defined him. What mattered now was the future he would build with Zara and Nina, a future filled with love, hope, and the promise of better days ahead. As they stood together in the quiet aftermath of crisis, watching Helena Cross's ships disappear into the void, Dex finally understood what Tessa had tried to tell him. Sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't running toward danger or away from it, it was standing still long enough to let someone love you, scars and all. And in that moment, surrounded by the two people who had become his whole world, Dex Rivera finally came home.